Hey, you are listening to the Victims and Villains podcast, a podcast simply existing to educate and engage individuals like yourselves on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. My name's Captain Nostalgia, and on this episode, we are celebrating a makeshift Friday the 13th to work our way through the Jason Voorhees saga and franchise, whichever you want to talk about it. And my main co-host for this entire journey that has been going on for 4 or 5 years at this point, has just recently been named a podcaster to watch out for if you are in the realm of retro gaming, from the Retro Gamers podcast, Mr. Anthony Rippo.
Hey, Josh. How are you, sir?
Hey, what's up, man?
Not much. Thank you for having me. As always, I'm always excited when we get to do a podcast together. I'm even more excited when we get to the Friday the 13th because we've been doing this literally for years.
Yeah. And we have a couple more years to go. We're talking about the 9th entry into this film, the franchise Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, which is
a lie.
Anything but, because wasn't part 4 also called the Final Friday, or like wasn't that like one of the taglines?
It was what was it? Friday
Final Chapter.
Final Chapter. It was the final chapter. That was supposed to be the end. And then we got to the Final Friday, and that was supposed to be the end. And of course, here we are, still going.
Yeah, we got what? 3 more left after this. So
yes,
you got 3 more. Almost there.
Ironically, the Friday franchise ended with 12 and not 13.
Yeah, but who knows? Maybe we'll tag on the video game in this. That'd be a cool episode to do.
I would love to talk about. Well, I would love to just talk about all the Friday video games. There's more than one.
Oh yeah, that's right. There's it's like the Nintendo DS one, or the Nintendo the NES one.
The Nintendo. Yeah, there's the NES guy. There's the NES game, and there's the Friday the 13th game from the Commodore 64.
Ooh, I didn't know about that one.
Yep. In fact, if you, I don't know when this podcast is dropping, but the Retro Gamers podcast on August 9th celebrates the Commodore 64's 40th anniversary. And I actually do talk a little bit about Friday the 13th on that one.
Well, this episode's only going to drop a couple days after that episode, so make sure that you guys go back and check out that episode. It's like perfect timing, you know?
Yeah, great timing. Absolutely.
I'm gonna put a disclosure up on this one. Anthony watched the theatrical cut that you can stream on HBO Max right now, and I watched the uncut version thanks to Scream Factory and their beautiful box set that they have produced. But this is going to be a fun and fascinating one to talk about.
Oh yeah.
And I think right off the bat, we should address the fact that this is no longer a Paramount Pictures property. This is no longer taking place in the 80s, and there is a huge stylistic change that we see forego with Jason Goes to Hell.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about, this one was released in 1993. So we're talking about a couple of things here. One, I believe it was New Line took over the franchise. Is that correct? Yeah. I think so.
Yeah. New Line produced a trilogy of them, and then I believe co-produced the reboot with Paramount.
Yes. So New Line took over at this time. Of course, everybody knew New Line Cinema for the greatness that is Nightmare on Elm Street up until then. And this also came out at an interesting time as well, because this was also the infamous time in the 90s when the MPAA, the ratings board, very upset parents were attacking any film that had anything that was not not PG. So I think this is one of those films that was probably a sufferer of that.
Yeah, this film's really interesting to talk about in the context of not only where the slasher genre was at the time, but, and I think we're going to come at this from 2 different angles, but this movie also, I feel like, was slightly ahead of its time for some of the horror trends. We would later see replicated in Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, and also Bride of Chucky in 1997.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. There was a shift. I think what happened was, I think we were getting to I don't even know if I would call this a slasher. I mean, do you just call it straight up horror because he's an undead guy? Slasher to me was always that the killer was an actual human being.
Yeah.
When you define the genre, Jason is definitely not a human. He was when he was a boy, but definitely not a human. But I would say horror at this point in time was definitely on the downtrend, just because I would think everybody was just dealing with sequel fatigue. I mean, your hard hitters were just, you were at, Jason was at part 9. A Nightmare on Elm Street was at part 6. Halloween was, I think, 5 in or close to 5 in at this point, 4 or 5 in. So like everything, you were just getting endless sequels, and there was very little in between. Like I can count on my hand maybe other horror movies that I remember as well as those 3 series at the time. Well, and also, Child's Play was starting to do sequels too.
Yeah, and this one too is interesting to talk about, because when you look at the original kind of trio of foundational slasher movies, you have, and I know, let me just say this to any listeners. I understand that Black Christmas and Texas Chainsaw Massacres were kind of the grandfathers of the genre, but largely in part, what you have here is it's Michael, Jason, and Freddy that are kind of the forefathers of the slasher boom that we know of the 80s.
Oh yeah, I agree with that.
And at this point, it's interesting too, also because you have sequel fatigue, but you're also getting further and further away from the original visions that Carpenter and Cunningham and Craven had for these 3 characters, where they're not just evil and mysterious for the sake of evil, but we're having to explain literally everything away. And this is kind of, when you look at, like, Freddy Krueger had was it No More Mr. Nice Guy, the pilot for Freddy's Nightmares that explained his entire backstory. We also saw it in Nightmare parts I think 4, 5, and 6. Michael Myers had they tried to explain it away in parts 4, 5, and 6. And then even Leatherface had it in the remake boom of the early 2000s. And then the far less superior sequel, probably his worst outing in 2017's Leatherface. But here in Jason Goes to Hell, this is trying to kind of like weirdly explain like why Jason is evil and why he's psychotic. And it's interesting because you're getting further and further away from what makes these guys truly terrifying.
Right. And that's where I think it becomes an issue with any horror icon. It's like when you have to explain their existence away, it does take away a little bit of that, the horrifying aspect to them, where it's like, oh, well, there's a reason why they're killing, and here's why. And it's like, okay, I'm like, well, now I don't think, I think Nightmare on Elm Street was one of the ones that, but probably out of all of them, bugged me the most, because not to shift away from Friday the 13th, but just the whole idea of like, he became this evil thing because these dream demons came to him when he was dying so he can get revenge, when, just the fact of what he was before that movie was so much more terrifying than having a demon take him over. I mean, an evil child murderer who lives on after death in your dreams and continues to kill you, to me, is so much more horrifying than having to explain that a bunch of demons came to him and offered him the opportunity to get revenge on people who justifiably killed him.
Yeah, and I know that like it's a big contention between the two of us when we talk about the Nightmare sequels and reboots, but like that's one of the things that I think the reboot also, say what you will, about the reboot. It's one of the things I think the reboot does fairly well is that it kind of doesn't have to explain it, but it makes you understand why he did what he did. But also at the same time, like we've seen so many different like variations of that explanation of like why he's evil. And when you look at the foundation that Craven laid down in 84, like the fact alone that like here you have a child murderer that somehow ended up in a hellish realm where he can kill kids just by sleeping is absolutely terrifying enough. You don't have to explain anything else.
Right. And by the way, I still blame you thoroughly for making me watch the Nightmare on Elm Street reboot, because that was an hour and a half to 2 hours of my life I'll never get back. And I'm still mourning that. So
here lies Anthony's time.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, trust me, there are a lot of gravestones that say that with a very long list of movies. A very long list of movies.
I'm also curious to see how many of those movies Friday the 13th has contributed to that.
Well, I mean, and not only that, but multiple times. Because now I can, getting back to Jason Goes to Hell, I can honestly say I've probably, before I watched it, to refresh my memory for this episode, I probably watched it, I think, twice before. Once in the theater when it came out, and once on maybe VHS or DVD when I first got the DVD box set. That's probably been my experience with this one until I watched it recently. So I'm owed about 4.5 to 5 hours of my time.
So I want to say coming into this, because we haven't shared with either one. Just for listeners, we haven't talked about where we stand on this movie.
No, we never do that before.
No,
it's more fun to do it live.
I think I might be on the opposite range. So this movie, it should be worth noting, this movie has a cult following now, and I understand why this movie has a cult following, and I also understand why people hate this movie. But I think this movie is fun. But I won't say great. I think it's kind of like mid-tier Friday films, but it's a fun time.
Okay, and then taking the other stance, as I so often do, just if you go back and listen to the podcast for part 8, I think I actually might have caused mental damage to someone explaining why that one was ludicrous. But yeah, part 9 definitely on the low end of the totem pole for me. Did not again for the third time around, did not enjoy it. I really thought it did more damage to the series than in any of the other sequels. Actually, and maybe not every other one. I'm going out on a limb here. I'd say part 5 probably still stands as the worst, just because it wasn't Jason in it. I don't think you can get worse than that, but this one definitely sinks down to that level. It's hard to pick like what's the worst of the worst, because there are a few that are pretty bad. But this one to me definitely just a flat out bad movie.
I want to say part 8 is probably the worst one we've covered so far.
I would put part 8 ahead of this one.
Dang. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. This is going to be an interesting conversation.
I would, as much as insane as part 8 was, and just in how crazy it was, I know this one's worse.
And so I'm curious, like, is it because like this movie, like you said, like this movie is no longer a slasher movie. This is now a supernatural horror / campy throwback to like B horror. It's no longer it. And again, I understand the hate that this movie has, because it no longer feels like a Friday the 13th movie.
Well, and you kind of hit the nail on the head right there. It's like that's the major issue. It's like at this point, when you come into a Friday the 13th movie, it's very well established what you expect, right? You have this undead, killer stalking a bunch of teenagers, young adults, whoever they are, And it's just, you got your body count and you've got your main characters who find a way to fight him off. And you're always going and trying to figure out how are they going to fight him off. This one makes a complete left turn right off the bat where you're just going into lore. Now, all of a sudden, 9 movies later, we have lore behind Jason Voorhees. And it's like all of a sudden, it's like, where did this come from? Like, where did this come from? All of a sudden, there's a reason why he exists, and he is, but isn't really Jason Voorhees. We're not 100% sure here now. And then there's now his family is magical, and like, geez.
Let me just say that the lore I think this movie is fun, but this movie is flawed in so many ways. And I think you absolutely just opened up a box of what is absolutely the worst thing that this movie has to do, is that it attempts to give lore and establish it after 8 movies. But I'm almost curious if that's kind of like New Line trying to like distance themselves from the what came in the first 8 movies of Paramount, because like also when you see him in this movie, they ignore some of the things that the last movies have established. And 2, he also at the same time is like, doesn't look like any of the previous iterations we've seen of the character, just from character design alone.
Yeah, it's the character. I don't know. The character design to me, that was probably the one thing that didn't bug me. The only problem is you only saw him for like 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's another thing too, is like, and it goes back to the point of this not feeling like a Friday the 13th movie. And I don't necessarily hate, I don't know. It to me, it just,
what's the name
I go back to this. Go ahead.
No, I was just no, go ahead. I have to look it up.
So if you guys listen to Abyss Gazing, our horror podcast, I use this illustration quite often, and I'm just gonna dub it Hellraiser Dimension Syndrome. And what I mean by that is, if you know anything about the history of Hellraiser, parts 5 through 10 were essentially, probably 5 through 8 on it, more honestly. What they would do is they would Dimension was trying to create these sequels to it, but they would take just standard police procedural movies and then go that they had received on script, go to another writer and say, rewrite this and force Pinhead in. And so when you look at everything from Inferno onwards, it doesn't feel like a true Hellraiser movie. I know that there are some people out there that will argue that it's fine. I'm not trying to create, but I'm also just using it as an example because that's how it feels like Jason was kind of forced into this movie, where it doesn't quite feel like a Friday the 13th. This movie didn't start out as a Friday the 13th movie, is what it feels like. And then they got the rights to Jason X, or Jason Voorhees. Jason X is our next episode. And then they were kind of like, you know what? We're just going to kind of retool this as a Friday the 13th movie. Yeah.
No, and that's exactly right. It's like the first thing you see when you watch this is like, wait, this is a Friday the 13th. It's like, to your point, it's like it runs completely different. What I was trying to look up, what the movie reminded me of, and there was a movie that came out in 1998 with Denzel Washington and John Goodman. It was called Fallen, where I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it was the whole idea of, so the whole idea behind that is that a serial killer gets killed, promises to come back, whatever. It turns out like there's a demon Azazel who can possess other people. So it's all about possession getting passed around to other people as the killings start again, similar to the serial killer. And the idea is the serial killer is possessing other people to do what he did when he was alive. And that's kind of what this became. It became that whole idea of like, you know, Jason's really this demonic spirit, not a boy who drowned in a lake who comes back from the dead to avenge his mother's death. So it literally took everything you knew before and just said, forget everything we said in the other 8 movies. Just go with this.
Yeah, and that's kind of the problem with this, because I think this movie presents a terrifying concept that Jason Voorhees is no longer the Jason that we knew from parts 1 through 8. Well, let me rephrase that, parts 2 through 8.
Yes.
And with that, he can now be anyone. This concept just comes way too late. And it feels like maybe this is just me reaching. It feels like someone also tried this idea to try and explain and make part 5 canonical. And I don't know. I think this movie has good intentions, but they're really poorly like executed.
Yeah, I can see where they could have, like, if you wanted to introduce this supernatural element, there are ways to do it where at least it would be a little bit more palatable. And in fact, there was, I don't know how much you looked into the background of this film before we talked, but there was previously, like before this script was approved to shoot, there was an original script done where the screenwriter wrote it, where Jason's brother digs up the body at the beginning of the film, eats his heart, and then takes on Jason's powers and starts going on a killing spree. And that was scrapped. And then they hired another screenwriter who wrote a new script in 4 days. And then that one was scrapped because that movie was about Jason getting caught in a gang war in Los Angeles. Very happy that didn't happen. And then
that would have aged very poorly.
Yeah, exactly. And then they went in another direction with what we wound up getting. So like this thing went on and on and on, apparently, before they were able to get to something. And then something else I learned when I was looking up information on the film was that when New Line took over the Jason Voorhees character, they had the rights to Jason. They did not have the rights to Friday the 13th, which is why their films are not called Friday the 13th. They're all different. Jason Goes to Hell, Jason X, Freddy versus Jason. So they never had the right to the title Friday the 13th. They also did not have the rights to the character of Tommy Jarvis, who was in the first script that was written for part 9.
Oh, interesting.
So, but they could not legally use him because that was not their property.
I would have loved to see Tommy Jarvis come back in this.
Tommy Jarvis would have been the Creighton Duke character. See, if you immediately swap out Creighton Duke for Tommy Jarvis, it connects it to the other films and kind of sort of makes a little bit more sense, where it's like, okay, he spent his whole life now trying to take out Jason, and he finally figures out the story, the real story behind him, or whatever, the supernatural story behind them that they wanted to craft here. Instead, it's a bunch of people we don't know. Just to get into the story a little bit, Jason magically has a sister who's always lived in the area that for 8 movies he didn't go after, that he just decides now I'm going to go kill, which is basically the entire plot of the Halloween franchise. Stuck into part 9 of Friday the 13th. And it's like, oh, okay, come on. Seriously? 9 movies. He's been at Crystal Lake 8 times. Well, not counting Manhattan, but like, all right, 7 times, whatever it was. He's been at Crystal Lake very frequently and had no idea he had a sister.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us. Yeah, that aspect of the story is, I'll talk about Creighton Duke in just a second, but the fact that like they attempted to like Michael Myers and Laurie Strode this story is probably one of the biggest abominations that is in this movie. And like I don't even know like how to like describe in detail how much I hate this.
Yep.
Like,
well, they pulled the Laurie Strode and Jamie Lloyd dynamic too. They stuck that in there too.
Yeah. Again, like it's not just him like going and like that we're meeting the lineage of it, but it is also the fact that we are meeting Jason's sister, Jason's niece, and Jason's daughter as well.
Grandniece at that point.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what the exact titles are. Yeah, it's interesting too to note that like the Friday films like started with the female Voorhees bloodline as kind of the protagonist, and that's kind of the driving force for him throughout the parts 2, 3, so on and so forth. And even it's explored in Freddy versus Jason. But I think it's also really fun to note in this movie that he's now hunting the female bloodline versus being motivated by it. It's an interesting dynamic that this movie does.
Yeah, exactly. Because it changed it to a completely different character. And that to me was the biggest problem with this film. Jason wasn't Jason anymore. Jason wasn't just getting revenge on the sexually active teenagers who were responsible for his death, and the counselors who killed his mother. Like, he's now switched it to completely like, in order to live forever and be unstoppable, I now have to kill my family that's always been around that I never focused on before.
Yeah, it's also interesting too. Like we talked about, like how different this movie is in just the stories that it's telling, and some of these are rights issues because like parts of the movie still take place in the town of Crystal Lake, but we don't go to the actual Camp Crystal Lake. Aside from, I guess, like the cold opening of this movie, is that considered Camp Crystal Lake?
Yeah, because they explain in the beginning when those three teenagers go to Crystal Lake that they had torn down all the cabins. So now the camp is no longer there, according to this. So they've even removed the camp from the story pretty much.
Okay.
And I think that was their goal. And maybe this could have been a New Line thing because they had inherited, they had gotten the rights to Jason, that they just wanted to go in a completely different direction. But then they decided, well, we're going to take the camp away completely. So they gave it a little nod to it in the beginning, but then it's just like, okay, but it's not about this at all.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the cold opening, but I want to get through this. My thought that I have now is like, even when you look at parts 1 through 8 or the Paramount era of Jason Voorhees as a character, the lighting is a lot darker, tonally speaking. Like, for as campy and as cheesy as those movies are, majority of them take place at night. It's kind of like the motif of Jason is that, he's going to go hunting at night. Part 8 takes place all at night. There's hardly any day shots. The majority of part 7, same thing. This one, while there are night parts in the third act, the majority of it takes place during the day.
Yep.
And you flip that with I suck at names, but Harry Manfredini. I probably mispronounced that name.
Manfredini. Yep.
Yeah. So he did the original score that's like now iconic, like associated with it.
Yep.
And like that's kind of like this like very just sinister, it sends chills down your spine kind of score that we would associate with other horror icons of this era. This score is very whimsical. Like, it has a very, I honestly feel like it's a few key changes away from a Disney score.
Wow. Okay. That's saying a lot.
And it's so vastly different. So like, we talk about like the stylistic choices that they've made, not only with the character, but also with the lighting and the tone, and also how they use music in this movie as well.
Yeah, I will say that the music in the film, and Manfredini is he's a very well-known Hollywood composer. Like, he's done a lot of scores. But I do agree. This one plays completely different from all the other Fridays. And again, I mean, it makes sense that it does, because they were trying to go for something completely different. So mission accomplished. If anything, I would almost say that the score might have been one of the better things. As much as you didn't like it, I think it was probably one of the better things for me, only because the score would not have, if you made this score like the other Friday films, it would have been so dissonant. It wouldn't have made sense. Like, if you would have made the score darker the way that it should be for a horror movie, especially for like a Jason movie, I don't think it would have worked.
I want to go on record. I don't necessarily hate the script. I think it absolutely fits the tone of the film. It feels larger, it feels grander, and it feels cinematic.
Not script, right? Score.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the score does. And like, it feels like it really fills out this world with really like spectacular wonder. And it really kind of proves the dynamics that Manfredini is able to do as a composer. Whereas I think that like most of the times, like, John Carpenter, for example, has scored nearly every one of his films. But if you ask most people, they're only going to be like, oh yeah, that's Halloween guy. But like, then you get into like from someone that's like, that is a cinephile, like, I love his work on like Ghosts of Mars, They Live, even the more recent Firestarter. Hated the movie, I loved the score. But as this one, I think it really kind of shows the dynamic that Manfredini is able to do with this character, Manfredini, with this character and this world.
Yeah, and that, and it's understandable. And look, the reason you go for the reason they went with Manfredini, obviously, is because he did score the other Jasons, but he was also big. He was a big composer for horror. He did Swamp Thing. He did The Hills Have Eyes Part 2. He did House, Slaughter High, which I loved watching as a kid. What else did he do? I'm just looking through his list right now. He did The House. He did Wishmaster.
Nice.
So he's. I liked Wishmaster when I first saw it. I really did. I thought it was fun and different. Corny, but fun and different.
Yeah.
But yeah. So like definitely the score in this film is not something that I would pick apart, because there's so much else you can destroy in this movie.
Yeah, no, and like we talked about this earlier, but I'm like, also it's an idea that Jason X plays around with too, not to jump ahead, but the idea of like the government catching Jason Voorhees, or destroying Jason Voorhees, or doing something where is like it. And again, it makes these movies of of the New Line era feel bigger than they actually are. Because when you look at the Paramount era, we never ever once see any sort of the authorities never intervene.
Right.
And if they ever do, it's normally like one of the last shots of like the final girl getting into the ambulance. Like that's the only thing we normally ever typically see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, depending on where you go, like Halloween Part 4. Like Halloween, I think delved into the cops, I think, more than any of the other ones. You literally had the cops like hunting Michael Myers down in Part 4, and then at the end the big shootout. But to your point, yeah, usually they come in around like the real impact cops have in these films are at the end, whereas you do a complete 180 in this film, and it's like that is your cold open. Your cold open is the cops take out Jason, and again, it's one of those things where it's like, wow. I'm like, 8 movies later, that was easy.
Think of all the lives you could have saved.
Right? If you just in Part 2, if they just did the same thing, would have been bing, bang, boom, done.
Yeah. And so one of the things too is like, it's interesting to see how the town of Crystal Lake in this movie has like adjusted to the legacy of Jason Voorhees. Where they have burgers and fries and like diners, like diner food named after him. I thought that was kind of interesting too.
Yeah, that part, I didn't mind them leaning into that. If anything, I thought that was like a cool little nod, and almost like I don't want to say it was meta, but like it was almost like that. It was almost a little bit meta where it's like the town recognizes, and that was probably one of the only nice things that I can say about this film. The town recognizes what they're famous for, and so people are trying to take advantage of it financially. And I'm like, yeah, that's what people do. I'm like, that is what people do. It's like, oh yeah, what are we known for? We're known for this famous serial killer who killed like 80 people. Here, have a burger with his face on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like it also kind of grounds this movie in some sort of like realism. It's a very minor detail, but like when you look at like, I'm sure that there are monuments and like stuff that are built up to H.H. Holmes or Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer, like John Wayne Gacy. Like I wouldn't be surprised if like you could go into like their hometowns and like go see where they grew up, or like see murder houses, or see people that like now live in those houses, give tours or something like that. And we even now, like being in 2022, like we have such an infinity for true crime and like the gruesome details of crimes past. And like, so again, like this feels like, again, kind of ahead of its time in some ways, this like little section of the film,
that moment,
because it does, that moment, like it does reflect like how we as a culture have kind of progressed over 30 years later.
Yeah, we have learned to not only embrace we've learned to embrace the horrific nature of, or just the horrific nature of human nature, if you don't mind me saying, and we've found a way to, like we do as good red-blooded Americans, we found a way to capitalize on it. And how do we capitalize on it? By making money. So yeah, come and tour a serial killer's house, or do the, I know in Hollywood they have, I'm pretty sure I remember, I don't know if it was TMZ, because TMZ does like, they have a tour bus that takes you around the famous places, but there is a specific tour you can do around Los Angeles, where it's famous, where famous people died. So it's like, here we're in front of the Viper Room where River Phoenix collapsed and died. And here's where OJ's wife was killed with her boyfriend. Like they'll take you, like it's a tour for those places. So we absolutely do that now. And to your point, with true crime television being so popular over the last few years, I'm like, it's just grown and grown and grown over the years.
Yeah, and it's not just it's not just like real life horrors, but also like the horrors that we place up on the big screen. You know, I'm pretty sure the couple that lives in the Michael Myers house that shot in the original Carpenter film, like they welcome people to kind of come out. I know last year when we covered Creature Feature Weekend, there is now an Airbnb breakfast that you can do. It's very expensive. I just want to throw that out there. But you can like stay and sleep in the Buffalo Bills house from Silence of the Lambs.
Yep.
And like they give tours also to the original shooting locations for the first Friday the 13th. And I think there's even like, I know last time I read the original Nancy's original house from Nightmare on Elm Street is also just recently went up for sale. So it's like you could see these real life locations.
It did a year or two ago. Yeah. But that's just because the owners are selling. But just to touch on those points too, you can you can tell some people take advantage of that. Like the Nightmare on Elm Street house from the original movie. I actually know, I know I have the address. I know where that is because it's in Los Angeles and I've been to it several times, and they clearly are continuing to take advantage of that fame because the house is painted the way that it was in the Nightmare on Elm Street films. Now, if you didn't want attention drawn to it, you would obviously paint it a different color and stuff like that. Sure. But, you know, it still has the red door. It still has the green roof. It's made up to look like that. So when you drive by, you know instantly that you're there. And then again, Friday the 13th takes advantage of its fame. I think it was, there was something a couple of years ago, I think it was 2019, where you can go out to a camp in Arizona or something like that, where basically you paid for a weekend, but Jason Voorhees was there. And it was basically like a survive the weekend vacation where Jason was going after you. So they've definitely found ways. We found ways to take stuff from these films and monetize them. You can also Airbnb Stu Macher's house from Scream. You can actually stay there.
Yeah, I remember that last year. And then there's another one too that is famously woven into the Universal backlot tour where you can actually stay or walk through the original Norman Bates house from Psycho.
Yeah, which is awesome. Well, the Psycho house is on Universal Studios lot. And so is the Bates Motel.
My bad.
No, that's nice. Okay. That's okay. That's why I'm here, right? I'm Mr. LA. But yeah, like they do every so often. I think they do tours and stuff with that, but it's really, really fun. But getting back to Friday, I feel like we're dancing around Friday 9 at this point and just talking about everything we can, except how bad this movie is.
Well, so I
but you said you enjoyed it.
Yeah. I will see that point and I will ask you how you felt about this. So the premise of this movie is like Jason has been killed, and upon his like death, like his beating heart essentially can be consumed from anyone, and Jason can now like take the form of any vessel. And he moves throughout the course of this movie, doing different bodies in the Crystal Lake region. And then in like the final act, it's revealed that like it's actually like a slug from hell. And but it's interesting to note for this movie that as he's moving along as different hosts, anytime his reflection is shown, it's still Jason Voorhees. And I'm curious to know how, like, I know you don't like this movie, but how did you feel about like them still kind of like retaining like this is the spirit of Jason?
Yeah, I felt like that was their only way to show Jason in the film until you got to the end of the movie. And I know that they want people want to see, at the end of the day, you want to see Jason. So their solve was, if you looked in the mirror, you saw Jason was there, and then you know Jason is embodying these people. But again, it's one of those things where like it felt a bit ludicrous. We're talking about a Friday the 13th movie. I get it. I'm like, but just the whole idea of like, you're following Jason in the movie, but you're not really following Jason in the movie because he's taking over other people. So it's not scary. There's nothing imposing about me seeing a random cop or a coroner or a news anchor running around as Jason. I'm not scared by that. There's nothing threatening about it. What would have been cool, because I always do this too when I watch a movie, I go, how would I have taken what they did here and tried to make it a little bit better? The slight thing I would have done was I would have actually had Jason's spirit embody Kane Hodder, who actually played one of the guards at the coroner's office. I'd be like, because that at least would have been a good nod to like, okay, we know they're going with this supernatural thing and we're not going to see Jason for a while, but it would have been cool as an audience member to be like, oh, but that was actually kind of clever. They had his spirit invade Kane Hodder, and now Kane Hodder is the killer for most of the movie.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today. Yeah, I would have been okay with that. I would have been okay with that. I think that would have been a cool nod. But I want to preface this by also saying that it breaks the slasher trope by going with the Richard Gant, I think that's how you say it, who plays the coroner character. Whereas like by this time in the rules of slasher movies, if you had a person of African American descent in this movie, they largely died. Like they were among the first individuals in the movie to hit the floor. Mm-hmm. And this one breaks that trope by saying, we're not going to embrace a black character dying, but rather a black man taking the mantle of the killing and kind of turning that trope on itself, which I thought was interesting. And I'd never kind of noticed that until this past viewing.
Well, it's you can also look at it the opposite way and say they tried to break the trope, but did they break the trope? Because technically the first person to die was the coroner, because he technically died when he ate the heart and the spirit embodied him.
Technically,
even though he was
Jason
walking
was
around,
the first one to die.
Well, no, he did. No, Jason didn't die because his heart was still beating. He wasn't dead. His body was destroyed, but he didn't die.
I mean, you could say the same thing for Gant's character. Like technically,
but that's the point I'm making. That's right.
Fair.
That's what I'm saying. I'm like, you can look at it either way. It's like, oh, they didn't kill the African American guy first. Oh, wait, maybe they did. It's like you can go back and forth on that. But despite that, like and again, it was also one of those things of like there was no actual reasoning behind why the coroner ate the heart. Like he saw it beating, and then 10 seconds later, he just picks it up and eats it. I don't know if it meant like he was in a trance or something, like he was possessed already. Like he wasn't possessed yet, but he did just pick it up and eat it. So even there, it's like, well, Okay.
That, my friend, is what we in the business call plot convenience.
Yeah, we do. And there's a lot of plot convenience in this film. There is like I said, the magical family that comes out of nowhere. Oh, the Voorhees house, by the way. There's a
Yeah.
Voorhees house, which is good to know. Did not know that existed. Also, something else that I picked up in the film that I don't know if I picked up in any other ones, but Jason's father has a name in this movie. I don't know if you picked up on that, but I believe the news anchor.
I did not.
I believe the news anchor brings him up when he's having the conversation with Creighton Duke, when he's having the interview. They bring up Jason's parents, Pamela and Elias.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because I wrote that down when I was watching it. I was like, oh, I don't remember them bringing up his dad's name. And conveniently enough, actually, in the original script I told you about that was shelved about Jason's brother taking over for him, the screenwriter of that had named Jason's brother Elias. So that's, I think, where they got that from. But yeah, it was used in the film.
Yeah, well, let's jump into the Voorhees house, because the Voorhees house is quite an interesting place, and this is kind of the first time that I think not only are we getting the groundwork laid for what would ultimately be Freddy versus Jason, but it's planned and pitched, and now dead sequel, Freddy versus Jason versus Ash. Because you have I actually suck with names. I know there's a name technically for the sword in this movie. There's that
the Voorhees dagger.
Yes.
That is what they called it.
Oh, okay.
No, that is what they called it. There is a magical Voorhees dagger in this film.
Yeah, this movie leans into the fantasy. Let's just throw that out there.
Well, I mean, the knife magically turns into something else in her hand, in his niece's hand. Like, it transforms. It's like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers.
Just a little bit, but one of the things too is like that it famously makes his appearance in this. Obviously, most people know that when the death happens to Jason in the final scene of the movie, like he basically gets dragged down to hell, and his mask is famously left, and the Freddy Krueger glove comes up out of the dirt and drags back down. You hear Robert Englund's signature laugh. This movie also has the Necronomicon appearance in this movie. And I believe there is another Evil Dead reference in this movie, but I can't remember it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Necronomicon inclusion was because they were trying to argue, I guess, or they were trying to change the story as in that after Jason died, his mom made a deal with the devil to bring him back. And that's why you see the Necronomicon. So that was where they were supposed to be leaning into. And so that was why, and then that was the way of them explaining, well, that's why Jason isn't Jason. A demon comes back as Jason, which is why he went from a little boy to an adult and all this stuff. That was supposed to be the way they were going to explain that away, but obviously that never made it in. So again, something that would have at least helped it along a little bit, where it's like, okay, this really started because Jason's mom made a deal with the devil or read from some evil book, whatever it was, if it was the Necronomicon. But that way, at least there's an explanation behind it. Like, but they never really went there.
Which would have been, again, really interesting. And like, to know that there's like multiple different like pitches on this movie is absolutely fascinating to me. And it should also be worth mentioning that the Myers, the Voorhees house is also a little bit past the Myers house.
In terms of location?
Yes. So there's a point where his niece is talking to one of the cops, and they're talking about how the Voorhees house, old Voorhees place is, you have to go out past the Myers place.
Uh,
Um,
I missed that.
yeah. So I missed it the first few times I've seen this movie, and I caught it on this rewatch. But I bring that up because previously I mentioned earlier how we got this movie takes like lays certain groundworks for things we would see better laid in Bride of Chucky. So Bride of Chucky's cold opening is you see nods to Michael, Jason, and Freddy.
Yep.
But also Leatherface, and then there's a scene where John Ritter dies, and he dies via a nail gun to where pins and nails are all in his head.
Yep.
And Chucky says, quote, "This looks familiar," which is a nod to Doug Bradley's Pinhead.
Yes.
And so like this movie is not only laying those little Easter eggs, but we would see other horror movies later on in the decade also take that same stylistic approach and interweave it into its own storytelling.
Yeah, and it's always cool when they make a nod like that. So I love catching those, being self-referential. Of course, Scream, which is infamously famous for giving a nod to like almost everything that came before it, but as part of the actual story, like they were commenting on the franchises in general. But yeah, I do agree. Like that was putting those nods in there. This was probably one of the first ones where you actually saw them outright. And it's always nice when you catch those. But again, did not necessarily help the film as a whole. And again, with the going back to like the Voorhees house, and now all of a sudden we have to go to his house because his house has some meaning. And again, the whole story is just to get into the supernatural element, because we haven't talked about it. Jason can come back. The whole story is he can come back if he kills or goes through a Voorhees woman. Like he has to possess a member of his family, and I believe it had to be a female member of his family. He had to possess a female member of his family in order to come back to life, which he manages to do before the end of the film, obviously.
Yeah, which I think is so fascinating because in a way, like I said this earlier, but it brings it back to the original 1980 Friday the 13th, where most people who know the franchise think it's Jason, but if you've seen it, you know that the twist is it's Mrs. Voorhees doing all the killing. And so to kind of bring it back to that foundation, I thought was a really interesting narrative decision.
Yeah, I mean, I won't take that part away. It was definitely an interesting choice. The question remains, was it a good choice? And that's where I fall off the wagon with it.
Yeah, because like up to this point, like I don't necessarily mind when we get like reboots or like redos or requels or whatever you want to call it to famous franchises, but if you are messing with the very DNA of that character and that lore by trying to weasel in your own lore without acknowledging anything that's come before it, that's where I have a lot of issues with it. And this movie definitely just really seems to do that with the addition of, oh, now he has a childhood home. There's like witchcraft and other weird stuff that's going on that Pamela used to do. And oh yeah, he's got a sister and a niece and so on and so forth. And to me, like it feels like it tries too hard at that aspect.
It definitely tries too hard. Also, another just a little random thing in the movie where I had to stop and say, okay, this is just flat out dumb. What is Jason's aversion to facial hair? We had to go through an entire scene where he had a cop tied down naked, by the way, for no reason whatsoever, just so he could shave his mustache before he possessed his body. I really would love somebody from the film to explain to me why why that was necessary.
I would also like to know that because Richard Gant's character has a mustache and
Yes.
never shaves it. But yet we have this like weird, like Hellraiser BDSM borderline scene of a man like tied just so he can like have a mustache shaved. It's a very bizarre scene.
It's a very bizarre scene, and might I also add that there were leg stirrups on the table. I don't know if like this was set up. Okay, I'm gonna theorize a little bit, and I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna stretch. Right?
Do it.
Was this table set up initially because Jason was planning to bring back a female member of his family to strap them down so he could invade them, so to speak, so he can be reborn? Because with the stirrups and everything, I mean, it was set up like a birthing table. Why?
Yeah.
And did that get cut from the film? And they were like, well, we made this whole thing, we should use it. And we get this weird naked cop scene. I don't know, but like, there's no other reason for that table to exist except for they were going to set up something like that, where they were going to sacrifice the Voorhees woman to bring Jason back. I have no other explanation for that.
I could very much see that. And I could very much understand that because it fits in par with a lot of the back half of this movie and the importance that the women of the Voorhees family play into the film's final act. So yeah, I could see that.
Yep. And then also I can't not bring up the demon worm Jason, whatever that was in the Voorhees house at the end, that comes out of, I think at that point, was it Robert? Was it the newscaster that it pops out of?
Yeah.
The news anchor, who also, by the way, you want to talk about boneheaded moves. And again, plot convenience, right? The news anchor is dating Jason's niece, right? Just so he can get this really cool story. And then he conveniently off screen commits a crime and steals a dead body, Jason's sister's dead body to bring back to the Voorhees house so they can find it there so that he would get better ratings. What? Like, what?
Look, this news anchor is nothing more. The guy's name in this is Robert Campbell, and he is nothing more than a variation of the Barry Sims character from Curse of Michael Myers we would see a few years later in part 6 of Halloween.
The opportunist.
Yeah, very much the opportunist. And it just, again, is like there's a lot that happens in this movie that you're just like, why? But again, just turn your brain off for it and just have a good time with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel the one character that I will say, like, there were two characters I liked that I felt badly for in the film overall. It was Stephen, the father of Jessica's child, played by John D. LeMay, who may or may not have regretted taking this role because he left the Friday the 13th television franchise to do this movie.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. Did you ever watch the TV show?
I have not.
Okay, so I really enjoy the show, but again, it's Friday the 13th in name only. It's not related to Jason at all. They just took the title and made a TV show. I love the concept of the show, and I enjoyed the actual show itself. And John D. LeMay is one of the stars of the first 2 seasons. He leaves the show to go take the role in Jason Goes to Hell. And then they replaced him with another actor for the 3rd season. And then subsequently the show wound up getting canceled, even though it actually had decent ratings. But that was at a time when shows got canceled for reasons outside of good ratings. But I just felt bad because I'm like, oh, I was like, you actually left a decent show, in my opinion, to do this movie, and it just did not work out. But again, it still kept him in the Friday the 13th canon in another way, which was kind of cool. I also like, I felt bad for his character because we didn't get to know who he was in the film. We just knew him. Like, and again, and that was the other thing too. It's like, I get it. Horror movies like this don't really give your characters a lot of depth. You don't really get to know who they are. But he was literally just boyfriend and father of Jessica's baby. There was no other storyline behind him. He just shows up and he's instantly the hero. And the only other character that I felt badly for was the other cop. I forgot his name. The one that was his friend. Like the two of them to me had like the best relationship in the film that almost felt human, like normal. Like, but we didn't get to know more about their own history. Like I felt like these guys were friends before. And they were the only two where it's like, I felt like they were making a connection in some way where they had a history, whereas everybody else was just there.
Yeah, so the other cop his name is Randy, and he's played by Kip Marcus. I truly did like their relationship. Their back and forth, I felt like, was just, again, like you're saying, like there's a lot of history, there's a lot of things that was really valuable about the two of them together, and I really liked this one, them together. But yeah, it's a real crime that like he's never given anything to do except kind of be the knight in shining armor. These characters are absolutely paper thin, and even Jessica like seems to only be in this movie not just as a Voorhees girl, but also to embrace the final girl trope.
Yes, yeah, Jess, that is exactly what she is. She's brought in to fill that role. She fills it. Whether she feels it well or not, I mean, that's for other people to decide. To be perfectly honest with you, like she was definitely not my favorite character in the movie. If I had to pick a strong female role in this film for some odd reason, I lean towards Vicky. I liked Vicky better than the other females in the film. I don't know if it was the actress who did a good job with it or not. But I thought she just felt more real to me than the other female characters in the film.
That's very true. So we brought him up earlier, but I want to get into Creighton Duke because Creighton Duke might be my favorite part of this might be my favorite part of this movie, but also at the same time might be one of my favorites franchise characters, period. I think Stephen Williams does a great job.
Do you want to hear a bit of trivia? Do you know who auditioned for the role and was turned down for Creighton Duke?
Oh, please tell me.
It was Tony Todd.
Get out of here! Really?
He auditioned for the role and they went with Stephen Williams instead.
Man,
right?
To know that like we would have lived in a universe where in a matter of 2 or 3 years we would have had Candyman and Creighton Duke. That's awesome.
Yep. And a very memorable performance by Tony Todd in the Night of the Living Dead remake. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes, 1990.
Yeah, he was great in that.
Yeah, but I feel like that would have been completely would have changed the character, because Williams, like, I don't know what you've ever seen him from, but to me, he will always be Mr. X from the X-Files.
Yes. And
to me, I think that like even up to the final season that he's in the X-Files, like he just has a way that like really commands him on. He can command the screen, but also at the same time like show a lot of charisma. And I think the diner scene of like when he's ordering the Voorhees burgers and Jason fingers.
Yep.
I think just kind of shows like he's able to walk that balance really well, and like even having conversations with different characters throughout the movie, and even up till the final battle in the Voorhees house, he's just able to really bring a lot of strength and gravitas to the character.
Everything that character was good on the screen was brought by Stephen Williams. There's no question about it. He did everything he can possibly do to make that a good character. At the end of the day, do I think it was a good character? No, I don't. And the only reason why I say that for two reasons. One, man, was his dialogue rough. He did, and that's the reason why, like, I give that man a lot of credit. He did such a great job with the dialogue they handed him, that I was more marveling at him as an actor than I was as him as the character. I was like, okay, dude, I'm like, you're doing everything you possibly can to make the best of this, and I applaud you. I was like, but it still wouldn't take me out of the dialogue, because when I would hear him speak lines, I'm like, okay, this is bad. The other thing that bothered me, and this is about the Creighton Duke character, no connection to the franchise whatsoever. Now, again, after reading the background to this, I could very easily see how this was probably going to be the Tommy Jarvis character in the script if they had the rights to Tommy Jarvis. The minute you make that swap to me, the minute you give the entire film a little more credibility. I was like, but because they didn't have the ability to do that, they did the best that they could with adding a bounty hunter who knew about Jason's past and knew what Jason was. But again, no explanation to how he knows. He's just in the movie saying, I know who Jason really is. I know you can't kill him. Only a Voorhees woman can kill him. Only a Voorhees woman can bring him back. Like, he kept spouting those things off, but we never knew why. And again, and it's another big miss from this film. It's like, you brought in this really interesting character and you didn't give me why he's here and why he knows what he knows. Now, looking back on, before you say anything, looking back on, looking into information on the film, there was, it was revealed by Adam Marcus. Adam Marcus was the director? He was the director. Adam Marcus revealed in a conversation that Creighton Duke's character had a backstory. And I'm just going to quote what I'm reading here on Wikipedia. But a teenage Creighton was out on Crystal Lake with his girlfriend. Jason capsized their small boat and pulled the girl down into the lake. Creighton tried to save her, but could not, and she was never seen again. Creighton vowed revenge, and from that moment on, he spent his life in the study and pursuit of Jason. He became a bounty hunter just to fund his work in taking down his nemesis. Okay. Good backstory. Good backstory for a character in a horror movie. Would have been nice to see that in the film somewhere. Even if you had to take like 2 or 3 minutes to go through that. This was also a standard horror movie. It was a 90-minute film. I think you could have added a scene to at least give us some of that. Would have been helpful. I'm getting the silent treatment. Josh is in awe of this description of Creighton's backstory.
Well, it's interesting because, like, to your point, like, the Tommy Jarvis character coming into this role would have completely brought in a different emotional core to this movie. Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
And because it would have been the natural progression, similarly to when you look at the character growth from Nightmare on Elm Street, the 84 to Nightmare on Elm Street, Dream Warriors. The Nancy Thompson character is now counseling other victims of Freddy Krueger and, like, specializes in, like, sleep diseases and, like, disorders and stuff like that. That seems like a natural progression. So to make Tommy Jarvis a bounty hunter who is out for vengeance against his longtime nemesis, Jason Voorhees, that seems like a natural progression. But the fact that Creighton Duke's backstory is cut from this movie, knowing that, kind of, I still enjoy this movie. It just kind of comes across a little bit. It's more interesting, the fact that he did have a backstory that ultimately is akin to Chris's backstory from Friday the 13th Part 3, where instead of kind of being traumatized by it, he is juxtaposed and is driven by that vengeance. And those two things would have been it's such a dynamic, cool thing to do. Like you could have done that as your cold opening versus what we got of like Jason blowing up and being taken out by the feds.
Yeah, exactly. Like that would have been an interesting start to, but again, but even still with the knowledge that the Creighton Duke character has, that wouldn't have been the open of the movie. He wouldn't have gone after Jason that way. He knew that he had to find, he knew he had to, no matter what was going on, he knew he had to find the Voorhees lineage and get one of them to kill Jason.
I also think this movie is a missed opportunity for the Creighton Duke character because we don't see that character journey from, the initial like girlfriend disappearance to like how he comes to acquire and like study and understand and know all of this information about Jason and the Voorhees lineage.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that makes total sense.
There has to be a filmmaker out there that has explored this in a fan film. And if you have and you come across it, tweet to us at Victims and Villains. Let us know.
Yeah. There's a fan-made film where they actually got the actor who played Tommy Jarvis to come back. I'm trying to remember the name of the fan film.
Oh,
let me
go on.
You don't know that one? Maybe we should cover that once we're done with the other 12.
Yeah.
Actually, a friend of mine knows the person who made the film. I just can't remember.
Nice.
There were two. Never Hike Alone.
Yep. Okay.
And Never Hike in the Snow.
Yeah.
You've seen those.
I haven't, but I know the filmmakers that have made those.
Okay. Okay. I believe it's this one. It's I'm trying to look it up real time, but it's called I think it's Jason Rising. Is that the one?
I feel like I've seen
Jason
one.
Rising, a Friday the 13th fan film. Well, the easiest way for me to do it is to just look up Friday the 13th, go to part 6, and figure out where Tommy, I can't remember the actor who played Tommy Jarvis. Do you remember his name? No. So anyway,
his name is Tom Matthews, and it's Never Hike Alone and Never Hike in the Snow.
Yeah. So he was in those.
Yeah.
And apparently there's another one coming. Never Hike Alone 2, Never Hike Again.
All right. Well, maybe we cover that trilogy when we come out.
I
Tommy
think
Jarvis.
I think we should.
I'm down for that. There's still a lot more Friday content you can make.
Yes.
But if you guys are new to our content, we are a podcast and a podcast network that specifically takes movies and other areas of pop culture and talks about them through a mental health lens. And while we are on the subject of Creighton Duke, yep. There's a moment in the movie where he talks about how everyone and everything and everyone has a price. And I think that goes back to the old adage, if you don't believe in something, you'll fall for anything. And that specifically, like not getting into like religion or like any like spirituality. Like I think it's like even a core concept of like being comfortable in your own skin and like knowing who you are, else you will fall. Because I think to his point of everyone has a price, like we kind of see that throughout the finale of this movie.
Yes, we definitely do. And if this movie teaches you anything, if you're not comfortable in your own skin, become a demon and jump into somebody else's.
I mean, just a little bit, maybe, but like, again, just like it goes back to
just make sure you tie them down to a table and shave their mustache first, though, please.
Please, there are no mustaches allowed here. You
must practice good grooming. Very important.
Yeah, this movie, like, it's not like super deep, so it's like hard to kind of talk about like some mental health stuff that this movie portrays. But I think,
No, I think
some of
it might cause more mental health problems than actually
look, this is why you
discuss.
gotta turn off your brain and just watch this for the popcorn movie it is.
This is the ultimate turn off your brain. But I wouldn't even call it a popcorn movie. I would call it like the popcorn kernels that don't pop in the microwave when you make the popcorn. Like that's the kind of movie this is to me.
I would say the score says otherwise, because this is a very whimsical score.
Well,
Well,
think about it. You had a whimsical Jason. He very, very, he very nonchalantly just traveled into other bodies.
This is very true. So, just an encouragement to know who you are and be comfortable and stand your ground and know your convictions, because in the end, I think it prevents you from not only going through things like depression or being uncomfortable or trying to conform to someone else's way of happiness in efforts to find your own happiness. Those attempts are really fleeting, and to be comfortable in your own skin, to bring back the whole Jason thing, it's really important to your mental health at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, and to your point, that's probably, if you were to connect it in any way, that's probably the best way to put it. You can't, and maybe just to add a little bit to it, you can't run away from your problems, right? You can't run away from who you are. You need to accept who you are, embrace it, be it.
Yeah, because eventually everything always catches up with you, and if you are willing to embrace it head on, for as uncomfortable as it might be. We even see that with the Jessica character, where she didn't want to be in what's the ex-boyfriend's name again? It's David. Steven. You see that with them too, like her like not wanting to embrace that, but again, it ended up being the best for both parties. So just, again, it eventually comes to your door, whether we want it to or not.
Yes, exactly. Especially if some weird person comes up to you and tells you about your crazy family lineage and how you're magical.
Well, I think that is going to do it for us. On the next journey into Friday the 13th, we are going from hell to space with Jason X.
Wait, before we go there, though, one thing we always do on these episodes that we did not do yet. You did not give the movie a rating.
Okay. All right. I'm going to let you, as the guest, go first.
No,
Rorschach rating scale.
On my, we've been doing it 1 to 5 stars, right?
Yes.
Okay. So my rating for this movie is that it owes me 3 stars.
Ooh. So I will give you mine, because mine is going to be a 3 out of 5. Okay.
So then you owe me 3 stars. So we're going to meet at a 0 out of 5. Perfect. I like this.
It's in the graveyard of your time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. This one's as dead and buried as Jason was at the beginning of part 6.
Wait till we get to space.
Oh man. Well, yeah. Just a preview of space though. At least they knew going into that one how insane the idea was, and they just said, "We know. We're just going to go with it, and we don't care." And I give them credit for that. This film tried to make something serious, and they just fell flat on their face.
Absolutely. And we will also be talking about David Cronenberg's contribution to this series also next episode.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you guys haven't seen Crimes of the Future, go check that out in the meantime. Go check out our episode on it from Bisgazing, a horror podcast. But speaking of podcasts, where can people find out more information about the Retro Gamers?
So the Retro Gamers podcast can be found on Facebook.com/Retro Gamers Podcast, on Instagram @Retro Gamers Podcast, on Twitter @Retro Gamers Pod. You can listen to us wherever you listen to podcasts. You can watch us on YouTube. We drop episodes every Tuesday. So that's where we're at.
So make sure that you guys also go check out the Commodore 64 episode that they just recently put out as well.
Yes. That was a lot of fun, actually, going back in time and regaling on the wonders that were the Commodore 64. Exactly.
Wayne's World. You guys can follow us. We are on all the social medias, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're also on Twitch and YouTube. And you guys can also support us monthly and or just by donating via Patreon and or PayPal. Links are going to be in the descriptions below. All money that we make goes towards more mental health resources. And of course, you guys can also submit your nightmares to our 2023 Film Festival season of Horrific Hope. Show us your nightmares.